I never thought a normal camping trip could turn into one of the scariest nights of my life. My name is Alex, I'm 19, and I usually spend my summers exploring the woods with a couple of close friends. That weekend, we decided to drive a few hours out to a forest near Lake Harlan. It was just another quiet getaway, sleeping in tents, cooking over a small fire, telling stories. Nothing unusual at all. We arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was low in the sky, and the forest looked peaceful, almost inviting. Birds were calling, and the smell of pine was strong in the warm air. I remember thinking how perfect it was to get away from city noise and stress. My friends were joking around as we carried our gear through the dirt path that led to a small clearing. It felt normal, safe even. We set up our tents, and I started gathering firewood while they unpacked the rest of our supplies. The clearing was wide enough to fit 3 tents, with the dense forest on all sides. It was secluded, just how we liked it. Everything seemed normal. I even laughed at how quiet it was, commenting that we probably wouldn't see another soul all weekend. Then I noticed something small but odd. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees. I thought it was a deer, or maybe one of my friends messing around. But it didn't move like an animal. It stayed still, barely visible in the fading sunlight, and I could have sworn it was watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was overthinking. As we started the fire, I kept glancing toward the tree line. There was a subtle sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves far in the distance, just enough to catch my attention. Nothing else moved. No rustling from the wind. Just that faint, irregular snap every few minutes. I didn't say anything to my friends yet. I wanted to believe it was nothing. By the time the sun was fully gone, the forest had that quiet, heavy darkness. Shadows stretched between the trees, and the clearing felt smaller, almost enclosed. The faint noises continued, irregular, unpredictable. My gut started telling me to be careful. I tried to shake it off. After all, it was just a normal camping trip, a normal forest, and I was with my friends. But even then, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but the air had changed. The peaceful forest didn't feel so peaceful anymore. Somewhere out there, just beyond the firelight, something was watching. I didn't know what, but I had the uneasy feeling that it wasn't going to leave us alone. And that was when I realized that this night might not end like every other summer trip I had taken. After we finished setting up the tents, I finally took a moment to look around the clearing. It was surrounded by tall pine trees, thick and close together, so you couldn't see very far beyond them. The ground was covered with fallen needles and small branches, and in the distance, I could hear the soft sound of the lake lapping against the shore. There was a trail that led in from the parking area, but once you were in the clearing, it felt completely isolated. The sun had fully disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the forest in a muted twilight. Shadows stretched between the trunks, moving slightly as the breeze rustled the needles. The temperature dropped quickly, making me pull my hoodie tighter. I remember thinking how quiet it was, peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of quiet where every small sound stands out. I was here with my 2 closest friends, Mark and Jenna. Mark was in charge of the firewood, and Jenna was unpacking the cooler. I was supposed to be setting up a small camping stove for dinner. We didn't have cell service out here, which is exactly why we chose this spot. We wanted to get away from everything for a couple of days. No notifications, no noise, no people, just the forest. We talked quietly as we worked. The conversation was casual: school, summer jobs, plans for the fall. Nothing that would suggest anything unusual. Everything was normal. The sun was gone, but the forest didn't feel dark yet. There was still enough light from the lingering sunset to see the clearing and the edges of the trees. As we finished setting up the fire, I noticed small details I hadn't seen before. The trail leading to the clearing was narrow and uneven, with occasional footprints, but none fresh enough to be ours. A few rocks looked like they'd been moved recently, almost like someone had been walking carefully. I didn't mention it, probably because it seemed normal for a forest that people sometimes hiked through. Dinner was simple: canned beans, hot dogs, and a little bread we toasted over the fire. Mark joked that we were roughing it, and Jenna laughed, adding that we weren't exactly surviving the wild. I smiled, feeling relaxed. The forest felt like a safe bubble around us, a place away from everything else. The sky darkened further, turning the forest into deep shades of blue and black. Fireflies started to appear, flickering near the edges of the clearing. I remember thinking it was the kind of night you'd remember for a long time, calm and perfect. Nothing about this moment suggested anything dangerous was near. But even then, there was a subtle unease I couldn't explain. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement at the tree line, just a flicker, something too quick to recognize. I chalked it up to shadows and imagination. After all, we were just 3 friends in a normal forest on a normal summer night. That was the environment we trusted, the one I thought would keep us safe. After dinner, we all sat around the fire, letting the warmth sink in. The forest was quieter now, the usual evening sounds fading into the distance. Crickets hummed softly, and the occasional rustle of leaves drifted in the breeze. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It started with small things. A branch snapped somewhere behind the tents. I froze and glanced toward the trees. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. Mark and Jenna didn't seem to notice, laughing and joking, but I felt my stomach tighten. That noise had been deliberate, too sharp to be random. Then came a subtle shift in the air. The breeze carried a faint smell of smoke, not from our fire, but something else, lingering and out of place. I looked around, squinting into the darkness beyond the firelight. Shadows seemed to shift, almost like someone was moving just out of sight. I told myself it was my imagination. Minutes later, I heard it again, soft, careful footsteps, crunching on dry leaves. Not like an animal, slower, heavier. I turned my head sharply, trying to pinpoint the direction. The forest was still. Nothing. I forced myself to laugh and told Mark and Jenna I must be hearing things. The firelight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows over the clearing. Every time it dimmed, the darkness at the edges of the forest felt closer, denser. I noticed that the tree line looked different somehow, like shapes were forming between the trunks, tall, still shapes that disappeared when I focused on them directly. Then I started noticing small signs around our campsite. A rock here, slightly out of place. A stick on the ground that looked like it had been moved. I hadn't seen any footprints earlier, but now it felt like there was something, or someone, circling us quietly. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't want to scare Mark and Jenna, unless I had to. Jenna commented that she thought she saw a shadow moving behind our tents. She laughed nervously, but I could tell she was uneasy. Mark brushed it off, saying it was probably a deer. But even as he said it, I could see him glancing toward the trees more than once. By this point, my heart was picking up pace, but I tried to stay calm. The forest was still calm, still normal, or at least it appeared that way. Yet I couldn't ignore the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, something small would snap, move, or shift just beyond the firelight. It was subtle, but consistent. Someone or something was out there, and I was starting to realize it wasn't going away. By the time we decided to call it a night and head into our tents, I felt the first real hint of fear. Nothing had attacked us. Nothing had touched us. But the tension was heavy, pressing in around the clearing. The forest, which had felt so welcoming earlier, now seemed like it had closed in on us. And I knew that whatever was out there, waiting, was patient. After we got into the tents, I tried to calm myself. The fire had burned down to embers, and the darkness outside felt thicker than before. I could barely see the shapes of the trees beyond the clearing, and every sound seemed louder. The wind through the branches, a distant splash from the lake, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not far away. They were slow, deliberate, coming closer to our tents. I froze, holding my breath, listening. It wasn't Mark or Jenna. I knew their movements well. These were heavier steps, careful but purposeful, like someone didn't want to be noticed. I whispered to Jenna, and she froze too. She hadn't heard it at first, but when I pointed out the sound, her eyes widened. Mark was already asleep, or pretending to be, and didn't react at all. I felt a rising panic. The forest had gone from calm to oppressive. Every tree seemed like it was leaning in, watching. We unzipped the tent slightly and peered out. A shadow moved near the edge of the clearing. Too big to be a deer, too still to be an animal. It shifted only slightly when we looked directly at it, then froze again. I could see the faint outline of a person, standing completely still, almost blending into the trees. I wanted to tell myself it was someone else camping nearby. But the spot we chose was secluded. There were no other cars, no other tents in sight. Whoever this was had to be here, intentionally, watching us. I could feel my heart pounding, and my hands started shaking. Every few minutes, there was a sound, twigs snapping, a low shuffle, sometimes the soft brush of leaves. The noises were getting closer, circling the tents, testing the perimeter. I whispered to Jenna that we should pack up quietly and leave, but she was frozen, staring into the darkness. I tried to convince myself to stay calm, telling myself that if we waited, whoever it was might leave. But instinct told me we weren't alone, and waiting was dangerous. My eyes scanned the tree line constantly. Every shadow looked like it might move. Every rustle in the leaves made me jump. I started noticing other small details. One of our chairs had been moved slightly from where we left it. A water bottle that had been on the edge of the fire pit was now closer to the tent. Nothing was stolen, but it was clear someone had been inside our clearing, close enough to touch our things. By now, I couldn't deny it. Someone was stalking us. The forest felt smaller, like it was closing in. The sense of isolation that had been relaxing just a few hours earlier now felt like a trap. The shadow at the edge of the clearing hadn't moved much, but I could see its posture clearly, still, deliberate and watching. I knew then that if we didn't act, we could be trapped here until that person decided to approach. And for the first time that night, I understood what real fear felt like, calm on the surface, but every instinct screaming that we were not safe. I knew we couldn't wait any longer. The shadow at the edge of the clearing was moving now, slowly, almost stalking the tents. My stomach dropped. I grabbed Jenna's arm and whispered that we needed to get out. She nodded, but her hands were shaking, and I could tell she was terrified. I unzipped the tent carefully and peeked outside. The man, or whatever he was only a few trees away now. He didn't run.
He didn't speak.
He just stood there, watching, his outline barely visible in the dark. I realized there was no way to reason with him. Our only chance was to move fast, quietly, and hope we weren't seen. We grabbed our backpacks, trying not to make a sound. Every rustle of leaves beneath our feet felt like it would give us away. I led Jenna toward the trail that would take us back to the car, glancing back constantly. The figure didn't follow immediately, but I could sense him moving, staying just out of the firelight, keeping pace with us. When we reached the edge of the clearing, I tripped over a root and nearly fell. Jenna grabbed my arm, and I scrambled to my feet. That's when I heard him clearly. The crunch of leaves, faster now, closer, deliberate. Panic set in. I sprinted, pulling her along. We ran blindly through the narrow trail, branches hitting our faces, thorns scratching our arms. The man's breathing was audible now, low and controlled, and I realized how close he had gotten. Every step we took, we could hear movement behind us. I didn't dare look back. All I could focus on was reaching the car. Finally, I saw the dim glow of the parking lot ahead. Relief hit me, but I couldn't slow down. We ran harder, screaming now for attention. The man's figure appeared briefly between the trees. Tall and dark, then vanished again into the forest. I grabbed the car keys from my pocket, fumbling as I unlocked the doors. We jumped inside, slammed the locks, and threw the car into reverse. Jenna was crying quietly, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw him standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless, watching us leave. Then he was gone. I called 911 as soon as we were on the main road. The operator told me officers were on their way, but they couldn't promise immediate help in such a remote area. My hands were still shaking. My chest ached from running. Every sound in the car, the radio, the wind, even the engine, felt amplified, like it could give us away. By the time we reached the first town, the adrenaline was fading. We told the police everything, described the man, and what had happened. They said they'd searched the area, but the forest was vast and dark. There was no guarantee anyone would be found. Even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't fully escaped. That night, and for many nights after, I kept imagining those slow, deliberate steps following us through the woods. I realized then how close we had come, and how quickly normal life could become terrifyingly fragile. The next morning, after a night spent at a friend's house, the police called. They had searched the area near our campsite, following the tracks we had described. What they told me made my stomach turn. The footprints around our tents weren't just from someone walking, they were circling the site for hours. And then there was the knife. The officer explained that it had been left carefully placed on the ground, almost like a warning or a marker. Whoever had been out there hadn't rushed. They had been patient, deliberate. I felt sick as he described the details. The knife wasn't mine. We had double-checked our bags before the trip, and the officer said there were small pieces of evidence suggesting the man had been hiding close to our tents for most of the night, moving silently just out of sight. That meant he had been there while we ate, while we set up the fire, even while we slept. I went back to the campsite later with the police. The ground was covered in footprints that didn't match ours or any local hikers. Some prints led straight into the forest, then disappeared. Others looped around the clearing, stopping near the tents and the fire pit, then circling back. The strangest part? The officer found a small bundle of items partially hidden under a bush near the edge of the clearing. Among them were a pair of gloves, a flashlight, and a notebook. Flipping through it, I saw crude sketches of the clearing and notes about times, movements, and even mentions of them and sleeping patterns. It was detailed, almost obsessive, like he had been watching and planning for a long time. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't just a random encounter. This man had been observing campers for hours, waiting for the right moment. Every little sound we had thought was a coincidence, twigs snapping, shadows shifting, footsteps crunching, was him, tracking us, seeing how we moved. The officer warned me that cases like this were rare, but not unheard of. People sometimes hide in remote areas, stalking unsuspecting campers. They don't always attack, but the threat is very real. The shocking truth hit me. The man we had seen was not an isolated incident. He had planned to be there, and he had been patient, careful, and entirely unnoticed until that moment when we ran. I couldn't shake the image of him standing silently just beyond the firelight, waiting for hours. Everything I had thought was random, the noises, the misplaced items, the shifting shadows, was intentional. He had been there the whole time. Every small fear, every moment of tension that night had been real and had been happening right under our noses. That realization changed everything. What we had survived wasn't luck. It wasn't a mistake. It was a confrontation with someone who had been deliberately observing us and who could have done much worse. And the terrifying part? He wasn't caught that night. Even after the police left, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped completely. The forest near Lake Harlan was still out there, quiet and dark, holding all the secrets of that night. I kept replaying everything in my head, the slow footsteps, the shadow at the edge of the clearing, the deliberate way he had circled us. It all made sense now, and it was worse than I had imagined. A week later, I drove back past the forest on a different road. The sun was setting, and the shadows stretched long across the trees. I thought I saw movement at the edge of the forest, just a flicker of something dark. My stomach sank. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that I was still on edge from that night. But the memory of those eyes, or the feeling of being watched, was so vivid that I couldn't ignore it. I tried to go back to normal life. School, work, friends, I did all the usual things. But sometimes, late at night, I would hear a sound outside my window, a branch snapping, soft footsteps crunching leaves, even when I knew I was alone. Every time it happened, my heart would race, and I'd double-check the locks. I could feel it in my gut. Someone had been there before, and they might still be out there. My friends felt it too. Jenna stopped camping altogether. Mark was quieter, more jumpy than usual. We would talk about it sometimes, carefully, each of us knowing we couldn't fully explain what had happened. The police never found him. There was no arrest, no identification, no trace beyond the footprints and the knife left at the campsite. Whoever he was, he disappeared into the forest, leaving us terrified but alive. The most disturbing part? Sometimes I swear I can sense him nearby, even in completely different places. A parking lot, a gas station, a late-night walk home. It's just a feeling, fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it's there. Like someone is watching, calculating, patient. I've considered moving, but the thought doesn't help. No matter where I go, the memory of that night follows me. I've kept the notebook the police found. I've looked through it again and again, studying the sketches, the notes, trying to understand him. But it only makes me realize how carefully he had studied us, how long he had planned his moves, how close we came to not making it out. I still think about that night constantly. I still think about the shadow at the edge of the clearing, standing perfectly still, just beyond the firelight. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can imagine him circling, waiting for the right moment. I don't know who he was. I don't know if he's still out there. And I can't help but wonder, what if the next time we aren't so lucky?